10-year-old boy accidentally fell from a building. When he woke up, he identified his father as the one who pushed him, because his father thought his son was too fat and it affected his appetite, so he kicked him down the stairs. When the police heard that, they said that the father must have some problems. In order to find out if the father was violent, the mother immediately assured Soo-young that her son was a good boy, but his sudden mania. Soo-young was a bit puzzled, so they checked all the surveillance cameras in the neighborhood on that day. The boy holding the dog was a strong suspect. Look at his father's face when he left. He didn't look like he was running away. When I asked my wife to check if she knew the boy, she thought for 3 minutes before she realized that the boy lived on the 3rd floor. But Soo-young noticed her wife's strange behavior. Not only was she slow to react, but her buttons were wrongly placed. Although there was no surveillance at the stairway, but the boy admitted his mistake. At that time, his dog was barking at Fatty. He was afraid of dogs and fell down the stairs. The father was cleared of all suspicion, but it was strange why the son would accuse him. So the police found the person who ate with him at the restaurant that day. After secretly taking her mobile phone, they found a photo of the two of them on the phone. The wife, who didn't know, was still taking her vitamins as usual. She took her vitamins every day, but this time, when she opened it, she found a cockroach inside. She was so scared that she spilled the pills all over the floor, and the pills destroyed the family. At that moment, Soo-young came in. She took one look and became suspicious, so she went to the drugstore and bought vitamins. When she opened them, they were yellow in color, just as she thought. So the wife's pills were switched. The father just got out of the police station and told his wife to leave. He wanted to talk to his son. Soo-young came over just then. She sat down without a care in the world. She even took out her mobile phone to record the boy. Soo-young knew that the cockroach was put there by the boy on purpose, and the son's next words completely ruined his father. Although his father was very nice to him, but he always brought his pretty aunt with him. Their intimate behavior made the son guess what was going on, but he didn't realize that the pretty aunt had talked to his father. She switched her mother's vitamins to a nerve stimulant, so he could ask her for a divorce when she was in a trance. He wanted to tell mom, but he didn't know where to start, not to mention the fact that mom's mental health was on and off. So his father, who had been out for less than half a day, he was arrested again on suspicion of intentional injury. Although Soo-young had a brilliant mind, but she never thought that her husband of 10 years is a 20-year suspect wanted by the police. So every morning before his wife woke up, he always practices his smile in the mirror. He even opened a low-profile studio, specializing in custom-made jewelry and crafts. But one day, an unexpected guest appeared, shattered his peaceful life. In fact, he just wanted to repair his broken necklace. He was introduced to the owner, Bai Shi-chung, who was a very skilled craftsman. When the man got up, his expression froze. Obviously, the other party was also very frightened. Although the man said he was too busy today, he called out his name, Hyun-soo. He even tried to confirm it. You know, they grew up together in the countryside. Seeing that he was recognized, Hyun-soo stopped pretending. He asked him what he wanted. Although the man said he was just looking for Baek Suk-seon, Soo-jun's husband. So I didn't mean to look for you. It's obvious that he's scared to death of the man in front of him. Knowing that the other party knows his wife, Hyun-soo instantly changed his attitude and invited him to have a cup of tea before leaving. You can imagine he won't let go easily. At this point, the companion's heart is even more panicked. He's experienced Hyun-soo's methods. One word to describe it is brutal. The girl deliberately put ketchup on her nose. Then she told her father that her nose was bleeding. The father pretended to be nervous and asked if she was okay. Seeing her father so nervous, the daughter was very satisfied. That day, the daughter's nose really did bleed at the kindergarten. Although the mother was distressed, she kept her wits about her. She explained that children are always bumping into each other. She told the girl to apologize to her daughter and make up, but the mother refused. She said her daughter wouldn't apologize. Your daughter took my daughter's doll first. Even though her daughter explained that she just hugged her, but she told Soo-young to teach her a lesson. Soo-young was getting angry. Hyun-soo arrived. He bowed and apologized. He asked his daughter to apologize to him too. The daughter apologized even though she was upset. Obviously, the wife is not happy with her husband's behavior. In order to comfort his daughter, the father ordered her favorite egg tart. But the daughter was really angry. She thinks her father doesn't love her anymore. She even thought her father was a soft touch in front of outsiders. But her father taught her the most important lesson in her life. Throwing punches is not winning. You can avoid a lot of things by not caring. For example, that girl has a habit of throwing things. Maybe one day she'll lose her doll, and then everyone will argue it's her fault for not putting her things away and blaming you. Unbeknownst to her, the father had just thrown the doll into the rubbish bin. No one knew he was a murderer in disguise for 20 years. No one knew he spent his childhood in the shadows. He was bullied by his classmates. Now he has to learn to smile every day because he married a cop's wife. The child is now 6 years old. The family lives happily ever after. The man's identity has never been revealed. But every time we go to mom and dad's house, the daughter always hides behind her father in fear. The mother immediately asked her daughter to say hello to ease the embarrassment. The daughter could only gesture love with fear and trepidation, but the expressions on their faces faces showed their indifference. Even the daughter can tell that her grandparents don't like her. It's only because it's her husband's birthday today. It's a rare occasion for them to come here, but the two of them looked like logs the whole time, seeing how much they love each other. They were so angry. Sure enough, when the mother and daughter went to the washroom, this so-called mother began to show her true nature. She asked him if he was doing this to irritate them. The old man stopped his wife. Tell them not to fight amongst themselves. At least we're on the same side now. But they don't know that there's a mysterious man in Hyunsu's basement. He was supposed to come here to fix his necklace, but they didn't expect him to be his companion. He didn't think he'd recognize him after 20 years. On the surface, he politely invited his companion for tea, but in his heart, he wanted to get rid of him, and his companion sensed the danger, so he pretended to take a sip of tea and left. But Hyunsu stopped him. He asked him if he was in a hurry to go to the police station. He knew he'd say no, so he asked him to write down an address. He asked him to write down his address and send it to him once he had repaired the necklace. He had to sit down and fill it out, but he didn't know that Hyunsu was already on the move. He pulled down the curtains and turned up the music. By the time he turned around, it was too late. When he got back, he was as good as new. The family was happy, but his wife had no idea. In the basement of the neighboring studio, there was a man locked up in the studio next door, tied up. Luckily, he was still alive. But the next day, the daughter complained that her mother couldn't blow dry her hair as well as her father, so she asked her father to help her. When she found out from her daughter, Mom was helping you clean the workshop. At the same time, her fellow prisoners were already struggling. Hyun-soo, who had a ghost in his heart, didn't dare delay a moment. But at that moment, his wife was crouching in a corner. Hyunsu was even more panicked at this point. His wife handed him a splinter. She asked him if he broke the cup. In fact, the cup was broken during the fight, but the husband explained that he broke it by accident, and he dragged his wife out to go shopping. The wife didn't notice anything unusual in the basement. Pity the man who was still struggling inside. You know, the wife is a police officer, but she never suspected anything wrong with her husband. She didn't realize that he was Hyunsu, the suspect the police had been looking for 20 years, but she changed her name to Baek Suk-song in order to look like a suspect. He practiced smiling in the mirror every day. She had been living in peace for over 10 years, but then her best friend found out about her whereabouts. You know he's a reporter. If we let him go, we'll be in deep trouble. Although the reporter explained that I just came here to repair my necklace. I'm just here to fix your necklace. I didn't mean to find out where you were. He swore that he wouldn't report him, in order to check the truth. Hyunsu opened his partner's notes to see if there was anything about him, but on the last page, he found a familiar name. So he took the notebook and confronted his partner, knowing that he almost died at the hands of that man. Now he's trying to find out something through Nam Soon-ji, knowing that he won't talk. So Hyunsu poured out the water rather than give it to him. At this point, he could only tell the truth, because there was a case a while ago. It was exactly the same way you killed someone 20 years ago. I wrote a story about Hyunsu, but 2 days ago, this man contacted me and said Hyunsu was going to kill him. He asked me to meet him tomorrow. He asked me to meet with him tomorrow and give him your story. Soon after, the man got a call from a reporter. In fact, Hyunsu was watching her from above. He asked him what he wanted to report on Hyunsu. The man told her all about their 3 years together and Hyunsu's personality quirks. He even twisted the facts. He said that when he found out that Hyunsu was a fugitive, he disappeared. In fact, Hyunsu was looking for his lost wallet that day when they went out, but he was so greedy for money that he felt sorry for him. He wanted to kill Hyunsu and take his money, and now the man is reporting that Hyunsu wants to kill me. Hyunsu didn't want to get into trouble and reassured him that Hyunsu should be dead by now. I didn't realize the man's explanation. What's the point of living with a murderer on the run? Isn't it better to be dead? At night in the hotel, the man was thinking about it. He wanted to call the reporter to ask if Hyunsu was dead. Then why did he keep getting calls from Hyunsu threatening him? Apparently, the reporter couldn't get through at the moment, so he was about to leave a message. Suddenly, a man in a raincoat came in. He was leaving a message for the reporter. I told you Hyunsu would come to kill him. What should I do now? He didn't have time to think about it, but he rushed at him 10 times faster. The next day, the owner of the restaurant fell in a pool of blood. His wife, a detective, rushed to the scene. The same rope, the same way of death. This is the murderer's modus operandi in the serial murder case 20 years ago. Luckily, there's a surveillance camera in the store. From the camera, we can see that the murderer was wearing a raincoat. Soo-young then remembered that her husband also wore a raincoat last night, but she ruled it out in a flash. So they started with the victim's phone records. The last person they contacted was reporter Kim. Unbeknownst to her, the reporter was locked up in the basement of her workshop. Before going to bed, the wife insisted that her husband put on a raincoat. The husband was so nervous that he didn't know what to do, but the wife armed him with everything. She even put on a hat. And then, in a moment of reflection, when he heard his wife say that a man had died this morning, the husband looked calm. He asked his wife, "Do you suspect that I came back in the middle of the night to kill someone?" Instantly amused, he asked what he was thinking. "Last night you came back in a raincoat. Even I almost did not recognize." And the victim just saw a man come in the door. Why did he recognize Hyunsu, who's been on the run for 20 years? Not to mention the fact that he was wearing a mask. How did he recognize him? My husband was trying to tell me that maybe it wasn't Hyunsu, but his wife insisted that it had to be Hyunsu. The main thing is that if she catches him, she'll get a promotion. But she didn't realize that her husband was Hyunsu. She didn't even know that she almost killed him during the day. She went to the reporter's house to look for information, but before she sat down, there was a knock at the door. From the cat's eye, it was her wife. A detective. He knew she'd come in. He was ready for her. Sure enough, his wife found moldy takeout on the doorstep. Worried that something would happen to the reporter, she had the door pried open. She searched the house and didn't find the reporter. But strangely, the reporter's cell phone was turned off. The clothes on the floor made Shojin curious. Why were the clothes crushed under the bench? There's only one possibility that someone came to the house. Then he touched the computer. A warm sensation convinced her that there was someone else in the house, so they searched every corner of the room. Unbeknownst to her, the man was watching from the balcony. He doesn't look like he's going to last much longer, and the wife is still sticking her head out to check. Suddenly the husband slipped. He almost fell off the balcony. He even made a little noise. The wife, who was about to leave, went towards the noise. The husband's heart was in his throat. Just as his wife was about to go forward, a coworker asked her to pick up the phone. God knows how hard it was for her husband to call her. She saw her husband holding the balcony with one hand. He was holding his cell phone in one hand and pretended to ask her if she knew reporter Kim. He told her that the reporter was here to see you, but his wife told him to tell the reporter to wait for me at the police station. He wanted to get away from his wife, but he didn't realize that the boy downstairs was staring at him. Then he shouted, "There's a thief here." Soo Young was about to leave the house when she wanted to check it out. Suddenly, her husband told her, "I think I have a cold and a fever." The wife was very anxious. She took a shortcut back to the workshop. After entering the house, she went straight to the basement. He knew he had the reporter in there, but he didn't know that the reporter was also trying to save herself. As soon as Hyunsu entered, the reporter attacked. Soon the two of them were fighting, but he was no match for Hyunsu. His wife rushed home and opened the door, but the door opened from the inside. Reporter Kim said that they were supposed to meet at the police station. Apparently, they've reached some kind of agreement. His wife is carefully cleaning Hyunsu's wounds. The reporter was so upset that he was the one who got hurt. Soo Young was furious at her husband's injuries. She handcuffed the reporter without saying a word. She was arrested for assaulting Mr. Baek Suk-song. The reporter was desperate and asked Hyunsu for help. Her husband explained that it was just a misunderstanding. "It's my fault for speaking out of turn. I thought she was after you and that's why the reporter got angry." That's why the reporter was angry. What's even worse is that Hyunsu apologized to him. The reporter didn't realize that Hyunsu's acting was so good. When he got back, he immediately checked his so-called secret. The camera was moved. That means Hyunsu really took it. If that thing is exposed, his life would be over. Hyunsu thought his identity would never be revealed. He didn't realize that the net that would kill him was coming his way. Early in the morning, reporter Kim eagerly found him. As soon as he walked in, he said there was a murder case. Hyunsu signaled that his children were at home, but the reporter couldn't resist showing him the news. "I didn't realize that the police had made such a stupid assumption that the restaurant owner's death was the result of a 20-year murder." Hyunsu, the murderer who's been on the run for 20 years, is responsible for the restaurant owner's death. The reporter asked him to think about why someone would impersonate Hyunsu. He was afraid that his daughter would find out. He pushed the reporter out. "She's a police officer, and she was interviewing the wife of the deceased. What did Hyunsu and your husband have against each other?" Actually, the wife only knows that they used to deliver to a restaurant, but her husband had been receiving threatening phone calls from Hyunsu in the middle of the night, and he seemed to be afraid of him. In order to find out the truth, they found the restaurant, but strangely, the specialty dishes were exactly the same as the ones her husband made for her. At that time, she tried to persuade him to become a chef, and Hyunsu pulled the reporter out. He asked her what she wanted. "My companion knows very well. He didn't kill the owner of the restaurant because the victim died at 3 o'clock in the morning, and Hyunsu was drinking with him in the basement. He even took a look at the clock when it chimed. But now why do the police think you're the killer? Even the victim thought you killed him before he died. Obviously, someone wants to expose you to the police. I don't know what the purpose is." Hyunsu couldn't help but wonder. "Why are you so anxious about me? My partner said I just want to work with you. I'll get you off the hook. You gave me an exclusive report. Although no one suspects you're Baek Suk-song now, but you don't want Hyunsu to be framed." Hyunsu didn't understand who that person was. His wife had already met the owner of the restaurant. It's true that Hyunsu used to work here. His relationship with the victim was okay, but he didn't have an ID. He was paid in cash, but he's so ungrateful. He just disappeared without saying goodbye. I thought he was an unsympathetic guy. Once I fell in a restaurant, but he instinctively laughed. When I asked him why he was laughing, he just said it was a funny wrestling move. That's why I'd recognize that guy if he were dead. But he didn't know it was raining and they were out delivering. They knew he was an unknown, so they went after him for money. They wanted to attack Hyunsu in the woods. Hyunsu, who was stabbed, tried to run away, but then he was hit by an approaching car. The collision gave Hyunsu a new identity. Baek Suk-song. But the real Baek Suk-song was secretly locked up by his father for 20 years, because he's now a vegetable. No one knows how hateful this kind of vegetable is. It can be described in 3 words. The crime is unforgivable. The man smashed the alarm clock on the wall, just to save his life later. He wraps tape around one end, then he picks it up to see how strong it is. Then he waits for the other guy to show up. Suddenly his cell phone rings. He nervously found a better angle. He saw his daughter crying for her parents on the other end of the line. She reassured her daughter that her father was out of town. She told her to be good and listen to her grandmother and that he'd be back soon. The daughter didn't know that her father was almost caught alive by her mom, because of an old lady's report. 5 years ago, she accidentally photographed Hyun-soo, who's been on the run for 20 years. She's been watching him since he was a kid, so she can't be wrong. She received such an important tip. Soo-young didn't dare delay a moment. At the same time, Hyun-soo received a call from his partner. The police went to the old lady's house to get your photo. If it gets out, you'll be dead in no time. In order to destroy the photos, they had to be one step ahead of the police, so they took a shortcut to the old lady's house. They had a plan. A companion approached them and stole the photos. Hyun-soo hid in the room first, but as soon as reporter Kim entered the house, he realized the old lady was tied up. Before he could react, he was attacked from behind. Hyun-soo, who was waiting outside, suddenly realized a dark shadow passed by and he instinctively chased after it. He quickly pinned him to a tree. He realized that he was the one who wanted to kill him, so he ripped off the mask. Strangely, he didn't recognize him, but he recognized him. He asked where young Mi-soo was. Hyun-soo was surprised by the name, but the man reminded him that the police would be here soon. We'll meet at the hotel in front. And the police did arrive at the front door, and it was Hyun-soo's wife. When he heard the commotion, Hyun-soo was ready to leave. While he was climbing the wall, his wife called out his name. Hyun-soo knew he couldn't be caught by his wife, so he chose to run away. But his wife, a detective, would not let him go. The husband ran ahead and the wife chased after him. Soon he led her to an old warehouse. The wife tried to find the switch with the help of a flashlight. Hyun-soo immediately grabbed a hammer. When the wife pressed the switch, Hyun-soo threw the hammer quickly and accurately. The lamp exploded in a flash. Then Hyun-soo put a cloth over his wife's head. He wanted to leave, but when he saw the tool on top of his head about to hit his wife, he instinctively stepped forward to protect her but was hit by the tool. Then he quickly handcuffed his wife and got away. Then he went to the place where he had agreed with the man. At the same time, Soo-young was found and rescued by her colleagues. Unfortunately, the photo was taken. I thought Hyun-soo would be the first to take advantage of the situation, but the police found a new target. A suspicious taxi was found at the victim's house. A suspicious cab has been at the victim's house for 10 days. It hasn't shown up since the day of the incident. Speaking of the driver, the police immediately thought of the cab driver who came to the police station a few days ago. He even left a cup here. Soo-young reported that the photos were taken. Who was the leak? The police immediately thought of the cup. They opened it and found a bug inside. That means the driver is a strong suspect. But what Soo-young didn't expect, the police found a watch in the warehouse where she was held. The watch in front of him made Soo-young freeze for 5 seconds. She looked at the back of the watch in disbelief. It belonged to her husband, Baek Suk-song. The man woke up to find himself in a drained pool, and there's someone staring at him. Originally, he thought he could save his life with just a small piece of glass, but did not expect to go to the other side of the appointment. This guy seemed to have a melon seed in his hand. Suddenly, he took advantage of his absence and knocked him out with ecstasy, though Hyun-soo stabbed him with a piece of glass he had prepared, but the driver pulled him back before he could climb. You can imagine how much the man hates him. After waiting for 20 years, the man seized the opportunity to turn on the pool's drain switch. He didn't give him a chance to live, but Hyun-soo didn't know what he'd done to him. The driver pointed to the photo on the wall. Where did you hide my wife Mi-suk? She hasn't been seen since she got into your father's car 20 years ago, because you gave your father an alibi. That's why your dad got away with it. But Hyun-soo insisted we had nothing to do with your wife's disappearance. But I didn't realize the man pulled out a pendant. This pendant was given to him by his own sister, but the man said it was a customized couple's pendant. It's the only one of its kind in the world. One for me and one for my wife. Luckily, the restaurant owner stole it from you. I found out you were still alive. I didn't kill the restaurant owner by faking the way you did it. Why would the police be looking for your portrait? But Hyun-soo remembers, at his father's funeral, your sister gave him the locket herself. She said she wanted to keep it with him to keep him safe. And when he was taken away by the driver, he was seen by the hotel owner's wife. When she was sure it was her husband, the wife was no longer calm, because they already knew that the driver was the murderer. And the method is extremely cruel. But the driver only wanted to know where my wife was. But Hyun-soo was already submerged in the water and couldn't breathe. Soon the police found this place based on the cab's location. The wife rushed in, but when she opened the door, she was attacked by the driver. Luckily, Soo-young was able to defend herself. Then the co-workers took care of him. Soo-young rushed to save her husband, but her husband was already submerged in the water. She didn't know if he was still alive, so she jumped in. The colleague was stabbed, and then fell backward with a vengeance. Coincidentally, The back of the driver's head hit the machine. Soo-young watched her husband's immobility and was close to breaking down. Soon Hyun-soo was rushed to the hospital. After being in a coma for a while, Hyun-soo suddenly woke up. Maybe he was afraid that his identity would be exposed. He instinctively wanted to leave. He didn't even put on his shoes. He bumped into his wife, Soo-young, who had just arrived. He subconsciously took 2 steps back, but his wife ran straight to him. After a hug, Hyun-soo's heart dropped. Luckily, his identity hadn't been discovered yet. But when Hyun-soo's mom entered the house, she yelled at him. She told Soo-young's mom to go home first, but her mother-in-law's words had a hint of what she was saying. As a detective, Soo-young felt that something was wrong. She felt that the family was hiding something from her. Meanwhile, the driver has recovered his life, but it's strange that he regained consciousness, but he feels like he's demented. There's a reason why he's acting demented. It's because the father and son are trying to figure out how to silence the driver. After all, Hyun-soo's identity can't be exposed. Otherwise, we'll all go to hell. They have to get rid of the driver. But Soo-young became suspicious of him. So in the middle of the night, she went to her husband's workshop with her tools. She was looking for the door to the basement. She'd never been in the basement before. The mother was making her son's bed sheets. Suddenly she noticed something under the bed. She thought her son was hiding something, but she didn't realize he had hidden so many photos and a bloody dagger. She was so scared that she threw it away immediately. She didn't know when her son got into this habit. What's even more devastating is that there were bloody fingernails inside. Now he was completely devastated. What kind of sin did she have to give birth to such a child? She wanted to kill herself with a dagger, but suddenly she found her son digging a hole in the yard. He was staring straight ahead, because there was still a motionless man lying there. In fact, an hour ago, his son was driving normally, but I don't know if he was unlucky. Just answered a phone call. He didn't realize that he had hit a person and he panicked, so he had no choice but to bring it back. The mother asked her son, shivering, what he was doing. She asked her son what he was doing, but he pointed at the man on the ground. He said it wasn't my fault that he ran in front of my car and died. The mother asked him if he was going to bury him. Suddenly he realized that the man on the ground seemed to be breathing, but he acted as if he didn't see it. He told his mother to go inside and not to get caught in the rain. My mother was sure she had raised a devil. How could he do it so calmly? When she saw that her son didn't want to stop, the mother had only one thought in her head to stop him. The knife she was holding in her hand was no longer working, so she stabbed her son when he wasn't looking. She thought she'd put an end to her son's crime, but she didn't expect it. The father saved his son's life with his medical skills. Although he was a vegetable, they never gave up on him, but he didn't know that his son would be a disaster when he woke up. He could even ruin their family. And Hyun-soo woke up after a month with the director's treatment. He struggled to remember what happened. A co-worker tried to kill him to take his money for himself. They knew he didn't have an ID. Even if something happened, the police might not be able to find out. But when he was stabbed and ran away, he was hit by an oncoming car. Although he didn't know where he was, but he knew his identity couldn't be exposed. He wanted to leave with his injured leg, but he realized that this family was quite rich, so he wanted to get some money to leave. At that moment, the dean came in and they looked at each other. He instinctively threw away his things and left, but with this body, he couldn't escape, so the two sides sat down to negotiate. Hyun-soo didn't understand why he wanted me to live in your son's place. He realized that the other party was also selfishly thinking of himself. If this gets out, he'll lose his position as dean, and you're running away because of something you don't know, so this is a mutual benefit. Soon after, Hyun-soo took on a new identity, Baek Suk-song, but he did not expect his new fate. I don't know if he was too handsome. There was this girl who was always clinging to him. At first, he thought he'd stay away from her. He was also a wanted murderer, Hyun-soo. But as spring and fall passed, their relationship grew stronger. They didn't realize that this guy not only got married and had kids under Baek Suk-song's identity. Even if his wife wanted to apply for the police, he did not oppose it. As long as his wife was happy, he would support her. But this day, her husband was unconscious. He saw his wife as his sister. He told her to live a good life. Don't ever come to me again, because I'm not Hyun-soo anymore. The wife, who was a detective, couldn't believe it. Her husband was the suspect the police had been looking for 20 years. She never suspected him before. She'd never even been to the basement where he worked. This time, she had to find out, because Hyun-soo's father was a serial killer who became a national sensation. Shortly after his death, he escaped after killing the village chief and is still missing. Soo-young smashed the lock on the basement with a hammer. Then she sprayed the prepared liquid on the floor. She didn't expect to see a large amount of fluorescent agent on the floor. She didn't dare to think about what her husband had done here. Suddenly, when she saw the sports car in the corner, she remembered when her daughter was very young. He was more caring than any father. More than 10 years together. The wife couldn't believe that her husband was such a man. In order not to alert the police, she decided to observe him secretly. Then she gave him a gift on the pretext of his discharge from the hospital. On the surface, it's a watch, but there's a secret inside. Hubby didn't think twice and put it on his wrist. Unbeknownst to him, it caused a problem. At night, her husband became restless, so he quietly went out alone. At this time, his wife was no longer as attentive as before, and Hyun-soo quickly came to his companion. Reporter Kim. The more he thought about it, the more he realized something was wrong. Why did the driver say, "His wife disappeared after getting into my father's car 20 years ago, but my father was with him that day"? His father didn't do it. There's only one possibility, that my father had an accomplice, and my sister should have seen that accomplice. That's why he needs his partner to help him find her. She gave him a locket at his father's funeral. Unbeknownst to him, the pendant belonged to the driver's wife, Mi-suk. But Hyunsu doesn't know that his watch has been installed by his wife. She was curious when she realized that her husband had gone to a reporter in the middle of the night. But when he came back, she wanted to ask her where she went, but he lied and told her he just went to the workshop. She didn't expose him but continued to observe. She wanted to see what he was up to, so she kept an eye on him from time to time. Strangely, he didn't go out all day and stayed in the workshop. Suddenly, Hyunsu received a call from her partner. He said he found his sister. He said he'd found his sister and was meeting her in the countryside. Soon after, his wife got a call from him. She said he'd gone out to meet a client and wouldn't be back for dinner. After hanging up, she was curious. What was the matter that required him to travel all the way to the countryside? Obviously, her husband was lying again. Soon Hyunsu arrived at the appointment place. His sister had been waiting for him for a long time. "It's been 20 years since we met, since the last incident." Hyunsu said he'd never see his sister again. Hyunsu was only 14 years old at the time. He found out that she killed the village chief, although it was self-defense, but they both knew that outsiders wouldn't believe them, because they had a father who was a serial killer. In order to cover for his sister's guilt, he deliberately took the blame for everything. He only wanted his sister to live in peace, but this time she needed her sister's help. The siblings talked until the evening, but they didn't know that their wife outside the door listened to everything they said, and she regretted it to death. The girl was left at her grandmother's pharmacy because her parents were busy, but the grandmother didn't want to. She grabbed her granddaughter's homework. When she saw it was third-grade math, she scolded her granddaughter for studying too far ahead. Then she tore up the book. As she looked at her grandmother's madness, the granddaughter was scared and cried, but the grandmother kept saying she was doing it for her own good. In fact, the girl is not her own granddaughter, and her son is still a vegetable. His father kept him in a secret room. His son has been smart since he was a child. He had medals and certificates all over the house, but once when he was tidying up his son's room, he found that his son's personality was extremely twisted. I didn't realize that he had killed many people. He even caught him in the act, so he stabbed his son to death. Luckily, his father's medical skills saved his son's life. Now she sees that the girl is also smart and clever. Her first thought was that she couldn't let such a child follow in her son's footsteps. When she saw that the child was frightened by him, she was at a loss for words. She asked the girl what she wanted to stop crying, so she took her granddaughter home and made her a special tart. She even fed it to her. She wanted her granddaughter to eat quickly so she could be sent away later. That's when Grandpa came home. The wife looked very nervous. She looked at her husband and asked him, "I'm in the house. Aren't you even a little bit alert?" She was so nervous she didn't know what to say, so she asked her granddaughter to say hello to her grandfather. In the face of the child's greetings, Grandpa pretended to be fine, but then he called his wife to his room. He asked her if she had any remorse. "Your son is still lying in the next room. Do you feel guilty for bringing a strange child into the house?" The two of them were talking in the house. They completely ignored their granddaughter in the living room. When she saw the nanny go by, she asked the nanny where the bathroom was, but the nanny didn't respond at all. She even smiled at him when she passed by and left, but she didn't know the nanny was deaf. She wanted to go to the nanny, but she didn't know that the nanny was feeding the vegetable. But when her husband left the house, he found his granddaughter standing outside the door, not moving. She said she wanted to go to the bathroom. Then he yelled at her, "A 6-year-old child can walk on 2 legs. If you don't expose your son, send her away." But I didn't expect that the next day when her husband was not at home. Looking at the vegetative son did not move. The mother seemed to have made up her mind. She reached out and tried to pull out her son's oxygen mask. "It's my own child, but what's the point of living with such a demon?" Soon the heart rate monitor started to beat. Watching her son breathe heavily, the mother stood by and watched. Husband rushed home immediately after receiving the nanny's message, but this time, the wife stopped him from trying to save him. As she watched, her son was still half breathing. The father rushed forward, but he froze in place because his vegetative son had woken up. Now the wife's hands are trembling as she holds the tray. She had a bad feeling about this. Listening to her son's weak voice, he told his mother not to blame herself, but the mother kept apologizing, and her son's head was really good. When he woke up, he asked how the person he hit was doing. The couple's hearts instantly stuttered, realizing that his identity has been replaced by this person, and he's married with a child. But they didn't know that Hyunsu was already suffering, because he married a detective wife. She's doing everything she can to catch Hyunsu. He was so worried about her, but he's not an accomplice to the police. In order to relieve his wife's stress, and to prove that Hyunsu wasn't an accomplice, he took off his ring. He made a risky decision, but he didn't know that his wife knew he was Hyunsu. A 50-year-old woman was dumped in the wilderness. She was a deaf-mute nanny. Strangely, the murderer's fingerprints weren't in the treasury at all. The wife's first thought was her husband. When she got back, She took his fingerprints from his makeup. Then she compared them and found an exact match. Although she couldn't believe it, the truth was there. She had to bring her husband to justice. In fact, the nanny had been taking care of a vegetable in a big house, but she could never have imagined that this vegetable would kill her. I don't know if it's because he's dying. The vegetable miraculously woke up, though he's deaf and mute, but the young master had an eye out for him. She always felt that this nanny was something else. She even asked her mother how much she knew about me. Mother told her not to worry. We signed a confidentiality agreement. Besides, she's only responsible for taking care of me. She doesn't know anything. But the young master said it would be better to fire her early, to be on the safe side. He pretended to talk to the nanny. Then he grabbed her by the hand and dragged her down. He asked her if she really didn't know how to read lips. The nanny was scared to death, but quickly wrote on a piece of paper that she really didn't know how to read lips. When he saw her writing, young master understood that there was something wrong with the nanny. Sure enough, when the nanny passed by the study, he heard the father and son talking. He was curious and eavesdropped. Suddenly, the young master seemed to sense something. The nanny was so scared that he immediately retreated. But this scene did not escape the young master's attention. He warned his father to be careful about the walls of the house. But in the afternoon, the nanny got upset. She immediately submitted her resignation to the madam. What madam didn't realize was that the nanny had the guts to ask for it. Not only did he ask her to pay his pension, she asked him to pay extra for the secrecy. Please pay me in one lump sum next week. Please pay me in one lump sum next week. Madam didn't understand what the confidentiality fee was. But the nanny said, I know everything about your family, and they're all deadly. Her ladyship asked him not to leave and to double his salary, but the nanny was determined to leave. Now, Madam was anxious. She wanted to play the emotional card. I helped you out of your husband's clutches. Shouldn't you be grateful? The nanny wanted to leave, but she accidentally knocked down her wife. Her forehead was bloodied instantly. When he heard the commotion, his son came in with a wheelchair. He asked the nanny what she did to my mom. The babysitter was gesticulating and saying, if you don't pay me, I'll turn you in. If you don't pay me, I'll turn you in. Suddenly, the young master stood up from the wheelchair. Mother knew her son's tactics. As she watched him approaching the nanny, she became frightened. Obviously, the nanny was no match for him. When the father found out, he wanted to help his son to dump the body, but then the fake son and daughter-in-law came over. Anyone who can't pretend would be nervous. Luckily, they had the perfect plan. While they were chatting, the power suddenly went out. Then, the wife used the excuse of getting candles. She knew that Hyunsu would pick it up for her. They happened to collect his fingerprints. At that time, the wife felt something was wrong but couldn't figure it out until she compared the killer's fingerprints with her husband's. She didn't even notice anything unusual. She even went straight to her husband and asked him to turn himself in to the police. He confessed that he was Hyunsu and that he was responsible for killing the nanny. He won't deny Hyunsu's identity, but he won't give in to accusing him of murder. So she grabbed a knife and held his wife hostage. By the time the police arrived, the place was empty. In fact, the husband only made a false impression under the surveillance, at least to make it clear that his wife had nothing to do with it. Then he ordered his wife to unplug the cable. Then the husband breathed a sigh of relief. But the wife was not happy. How dare you put a knife to my neck? The husband then tested it on her. This knife doesn't have a blade. It won't hurt you at all. And he just wanted to find the real killer. If I'm caught, you police will never find the real killer. Not to mention the fact that Misuk, who's been gone for 20 years, has appeared. That's why I have to catch the real killer before I come back. But just as he was about to leave, his wife caught him and handcuffed them together. But she didn't realize that her husband had lured her to a hotel. He handcuffed her to the corner of the table. The purpose was to let the police know that his wife was his hostage, and she only wanted to catch the real murderer alone. But coincidentally, when the husband's sister came home, suddenly found someone sneaking around outside her home. In order to catch them, they tore each other apart. In the panic, the sister's clothes were torn. Unbeknownst to her, she almost lost her life because of her clothes. Although Soo Young was found and rescued by the hotel staff, but she told her superiors, my husband is the one you're looking for. Hyun-soo. She didn't blame her. After all, you're a victim too. But suddenly she saw Hyun-soo's sister at the police station. She instinctively took off her clothes and put them on her. She asked what happened. Luckily, the police caught the escapee. I wanted to catch Hyun-soo alive, but I didn't realize it was a paparazzo. He was just looking for a scoop. But the more busy she was, the more she got sick and wanted to stay. Her daughter was taken to the police station. Maybe it's because they're related by blood and they've met before. So the mother told her daughter, when I'm done with work, I'll take you home. The daughter seemed happy to go back with her aunt. The daughter wanted to go home to get something, but they didn't know they were being followed. When they arrived home, they found the house was turned upside down. Sister suddenly had a bad feeling, but she thought they'd just take a few things and leave. Suddenly, There was a noise outside the house. The girl thought it was her father coming home. Auntie went out of the room and realized the lights in the living room were off. Suddenly there was a figure sitting on the sofa. It sent a chill down her spine. She immediately closed the door and told the child to lock it behind her. Then she put on the badge in her pocket, because she knew that the person recognized her as Soo Young. When she took off her mask, she remembered that this person gave her the locket at Dad's funeral. That means he's the accomplice the police are looking for. Sure enough, after he identified himself, he pulled out a knife. After she fell to the ground, he took the badge, and Hyunsoo found the only witness, Mi-suk. If he waits for this guy to go in, then he can take him down and clear his name. As expected, he looked like a ghost when he saw him. Hyunsoo wanted to do a sneak attack. I didn't realize that this guy's reflexes were quite fast, but he's no match for Hyunsoo. Plus, Hyunsoo was ready for anything. He tied him to the bench, but he didn't realize that the young master would stimulate him. He took out his wife's bloodstained ID card. As expected, Hyunsoo's expression changed. To confirm his story, he called his wife's cell phone and turned it off. Then he called the police to confirm the information. At that moment, Hyunsoo was completely devastated. In fact, the police were trying to save Soo Young's life so that they'd be able to get away with it, but they didn't realize that their husband would become the real murderer. He wanted to avenge his wife's death. Just as he was about to wield the knife, his wife stopped him. He didn't think he'd see her again. Luckily, he was able to keep his wits about him. They ended up in a perfect embrace.